That's the secret number. I think we're gonna get going. So welcome everybody to Cleveland React. I don't know, is this like our fourth or fifth one of these online ones? Yeah.
What is time anymore?
Right, exactly. But I have enjoyed most of them. I think they've been going pretty well. So I appreciate everybody for taking some time out of their evening to join us. Real quick, just a quick note on our code of conduct. We have it linked on our website and everything, but Cleveland React is a safe and friendly place for all people. And behavior that makes people feel unsafe will not be tolerated at all. So please, if you witness or experience unacceptable behavior or have any concerns or questions or anything like that, please reach out to me or John, whether on Slack, private message, on meetup.com. We also have an email that is hello@react.dev. I'll tell you guys a secret. It's literally anything at clereact.dev will reach us. But hello, I'm going to put this in the Slack channel too. But so please reach out if anything happens, or if you have any questions or concerns. Also, I wanted to thank everyone who contributed or spread the word for our event last week, for our fundraiser, supporting the Black community here in Cleveland and abroad. We together raised over $1,700 for a few different organizations. I just really appreciate everybody that joined in. We are. Oh, I have in my notes looking for speakers. We are always looking for speakers. James, actually, our speaker tonight, volunteered, and he hit me up and was like, "Hey, I want to talk about Next," and it was amazing. We would love to get some more people talking. We have somebody lined up, I think, for next month, but we're always looking for people to talk. We are also very, very open to helping out. Workshop a talk, helping out if you don't want to do a talk, but would like have an idea for some sort of different format, like a panel or something else. We are open to literally everything, any ideas. So please reach out to us if you would like to join us. I have posted a couple times in the I'm going to do it one last time to make sure we got everybody. We're going to be hanging out in the Cleveland Tech Slack tonight for this event. We have a Cleveland React room, so most of you probably already aware of it and are already in there. But in case you're not, go for it. We are on Twitter as well at Cleveland React, and our website is clereact.dev. So plus obviously meetup.com. You can, if you sign up for all of that, you will get communications 3 different ways every time we want to say something. Does anybody have anything they would like to announce or talk about or ask us? John, go ahead.
Something. So we started this conversation in the Cleveland React channel in our Cleveland Tech Slack. Looks like just because we have like a lot of people who have the possibility of like saying words if they want to, we have kind of like a split between doing maybe like close to split between like a noon conversation someday during the week or trying to do like a normal evening session, which may be potentially easier for other people to be able to join and stuff. So we have a person who reached out to us. They are not from the Northeast Ohio area. But they they're in the process of building a visual build your own adventure tool that leverages React. And they've done the talk for other like React groups across the United States, and I've seen some of like the recordings and stuff like that. And it looks interesting. It's not I don't think it's enough content for a full evening or what we typically do in a full evening. So we were trying to just figure out like when is a good time to potentially make this available for people to be able to watch or something like that. We wouldn't watch a recording. We would actually have them demo and show us stuff off and stuff like that. So if anybody has any thoughts about one way or the other. Vote with emoji on the Slack. You can also just say something right now if you really feel inclined and stuff like that. I don't know necessarily what we'll do with a split vote kind of thing. But we would probably actually just circle it back to like another conversation in the Slack room and stuff to see what people might be interested in. But
maybe we should write a coin flip app.
yeah, we'll just do a random number generate. But Dan and I are interested in making sure that we can provide something that, first of all, people are interested in, and then secondly, that we can get enough people to justify somebody being able to spend their time, which hopefully we're doing for you tonight, James. So thank you for volunteering to speak.
Cool. Does anybody else have anything they would like to, ask or add or anything like that? Let me actually get the Slack open so that people aren't just trying to talk to me and I'm not watching. Cool. Awesome. Well, then we're going to get going here. James, I mentioned before, it volunteered, he reached out to me for this, which very much appreciate his time and, and the fact that he volunteered for this is cool. I didn't have to twist his arm or anything. Just as a quick intro, James is a senior front-end engineer at RV Share, which is we've heard about last event, but a peer-to-peer RV marketplace. He's worked across the entire development stack in the past, but has always had a love for JavaScript and CSS. He enjoys helping out open source communities, teaching others, and writing accessible and performant applications. He can be found at jamesdmosier.com. And without any further ado, James, take it away.
Well, thank you for the intro. Yeah, and if you have any questions throughout, I'll probably just run right over you. So if I don't know if that like reaction to raise your hand works, or Dan will call it out or whatever, but yeah, definitely ask as I go if something.
Yeah, I'll keep an eye out. If you don't want to like mess up James's flow, feel free to just drop a question in the Slack and I'll catch it and interrupt James at the most inopportune time.
Yeah, that's preferred. Yeah, no, there's not much flow, so we'll whatever works. But I just posted some links that all unfurled. It looked like I'll get rid of some of those. But this is just a few links I'll be talking about tonight. I'll be showing all these, so no obligation to go to them. But yeah, my name is James. I work at RV Share. We're a peer-to-peer marketplace. Dylan, not last week, but a few weeks ago, gave a talk about WebSockets. He's also at RV Share. So we're taking over the Cleveland React meetup slowly. But yeah, let me share my screen. Cool. So yeah, the aptly named talk, all about Next. There wasn't much else to write about it. I have been using Next for about 2 years now. We adopted it at RV Share early last year, and we really liked it. And it's really been going well. And I like to help out with triaging issues and different things in the GitHub discussions and issues over there at the Next repo. And I've been learning a lot about it, and I've really enjoyed working with it. But yeah, some more background on myself. I am, jumping ahead, I'm self-taught. I went to school for communications of all things. I thought I wanted to go into user experience design, and little did I know the thing that I had been doing my whole childhood is what I wanted to do professionally. So imagine that. Could have saved myself some time, I guess. So yeah, but tonight I want to dive into a little bit about what Next can do as far as choosing your next project, and some of the pain points it solves, and some of the cool things that they're doing, and why I really like it. And I think that you'll find it useful also. So yeah, as you might have seen, really the way I approach this talk was just, what do I do to spin up a new project? And so let's say it's either a personal project, or I'm starting a blog for myself, or I join a startup and they're like, we need to build something new, or we're migrating off this legacy thing, which in the case of RV Share is what happened. And so what are some things that I consider as I make a decision on what my next tech stack is going to be. And so in most cases, since I love JavaScript, the answer is React. But then from there, it's like, well, where do I go? And so before any of that, though, we need to determine what does our application need to do, and what are the capabilities it needs. And so I always start at static versus dynamic. And so this question can sometimes be easy, sometimes hard, or especially when it's hard, then you're really sort of out of luck in most cases. And so sort of looking at your project, like what do I need to do? What am I trying to accomplish? What kind of pages am I going to have? What do users need to be able to do? And so looking at some of the pros and cons of each of these. So static, think of it as blogs, marketing pages, landing pages. It's the HTML and CSS you were writing when you were 10. It's just that. And some examples of that, I'm sure you've used or seen many of them: Hugo, Gatsby, Jekyll, 11T, the classic just static site generators. And you can feed it some content and it spits out HTML, CSS, and maybe some JavaScript sprinkled in, maybe. But some of the pros of it: affordable, secure, simple infrastructure, super easy to deploy. You can drop it in an S3 bucket or wire it up to one of the services out there, and it can just run and do its own thing, kind of set it and forget it. And so it's super simple to work with, but it's also really limiting. What happens when you need more functionality? What do? You're stuck then in the static world. And that can be a problem, especially as your either project grows, your organization grows. And so a part of that also is that build times grow as the page count grows. So even if it's a blog or it's a blog for your company, well, a few years down the road, when you have more pages, you have more marketing pages, more blog pages, that build time is really slowing down. And it might not be a problem if you are creating a website for like the bakery down the road, or it's just your blog and you blog once a year like I did for a while. Like, it's just not going to be a problem, and that's fine, and that's good. Then you have your answer. And then looking at the reverse side of that is dynamic. So this is anything from sort of user authentication, forms, dashboards. When I think of dynamic, I think of Rails, .NET, MVC, Spring, Django. The list goes on. Some, I'm sure everyone has used at least one of these. And they can be really great. And sort of the downside is that they're expensive and there's elaborate infrastructure. There's no just dropping this on an S3 bucket and calling it a day. There's some upfront work. They're complex just in nature, but they're really extensible. You can do a ton with them, and that's probably why you would choose dynamic. And then another piece that is sometimes left behind is that there is some runtime performance optimizations needed. So you can't just throw it in a bucket and have it be cached at the edge everywhere forever. You have to think about, okay, do I need to cache these things? Do I need to optimize here or there? So there's certainly more considerations to be made than just your static site. Some other considerations, and looking more at the front end of the world. Well, not even, this is full stack, so forget I said that. I know I've spent many hours and potentially years setting up webpack, Babel, TypeScript, managing it, making it better, trying to figure out how to split my bundles, how to get better performance. It's what I'm doing today at RV Share. We use Webpacker with Rails for one of our apps. And I constantly is staring at that saying, what can I do to make this faster, better, leaner? So I consider that. How much of a pain is it going to be to do this? Documentation of whatever framework or package or whatever I'm going to use. Does it have good docs? Am I going to be able to find the answers I need to? And then sort of when I can't find those answers, where can I go? How is the community? Is it one of those projects that we've all come across where on GitHub it says like last updated 4 years ago, and you're like, oh no, like no one's going to answer my issue, or there's no channel or community to ask any questions or get help. And then scalability. Can I scale my Hugo blog into a a thriving marketplace? I probably, maybe not. It's going to be tough. Deployments, do I have the knowledge and to be able to deploy and manage this super complex .NET MVC site? I don't think I've ever successfully deployed an MVC site myself. So I've always had someone else do it. But if you don't have anyone else doing it, yeah, you're not in good shape. And another piece that is certainly a front-end concern is routing. And so I know that a lot of times setting up React router can be really simple for your couple page spa that you wrote. But as your app grows, React router is seeming a lot more scary and it's a lot more hairy. And that's one of the things that has also given me nightmares, and hence it makes the list of things that I consider. And then flexibility for changing needs. So let's say that you say, okay, we're going to start out static. We really just need some marketing pages. We don't even need anything dynamic right now. But later on, you're like, well, let's add this new product or new feature. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, so now we need to refactor or spin up an entire new application to go to dynamic. And that's going to cost you time. It's going to cost money. It's not going to be easy and it's not going to be fun. And then one thing I always think about is ease of use for others. And so sure, maybe I can think of these 10 special commands to run in my terminal to spin up this app, but not everyone can. Not everyone just knows that because they maybe didn't start the project or maybe they haven't been writing code forever. So something that others can use easily and that kind of all roll up the previous points of like, can they go find answers somewhere? Can they, would they be able to deploy this if I got hit by a bus? Things like that. And if you can find yes to all of these things, then I feel like your project and products is going to be in pretty good shape. So what do we choose? We've had a lot of options, a lot to consider. And I think the clear answer is web forms and jQuery. I think that's the only way to go. And that's definitely what you need to use. No, that is, I've spent a long time with both those and they were both great in their day and some of them are still great now. But yeah, I would choose Next. It's zero config, you can just run a command, get going in development and production. There's not a ton of setup, there's no questions. There's nothing that's going to give you any heartache. It provides hybrid page-by-page routes, so you don't have to pick static or dynamic. You can have both. So if your index page needs to be static, great. If your dashboard needs to be dynamic, great. You can pick it wherever the code is separated. You don't have to worry about trying to use one tool for everything. They have partnerships with Google, so they ensure that things like SEO, web best practices, they make sure your Lighthouse scores are looking good. All of those things that I know that I stare at our Lighthouse score every day on our Rails app, and I cry every day at my desk looking at it. And so having Next in another one of our projects, it's great. They are able to give optimizations and insights into things that not everyone has time to be experts in. They have a full-time staff of engineers working on it who are great. Some of them may be in this call right now, so I really have to sell that point. No, but they do a great job and they're super helpful, and I have never been around a community quite like it. It's proven at scale in the real world, so real companies that we have all heard of, all used, all been to their websites, certainly use Next for their sites, for big and small projects. They've really adopted it and proven that it can work and it's not going to go away anytime soon. Which I think is also another good point they left off, is a consideration is making sure that, yeah, you're not going to get left in the dust by a maintainer who decides that they're not into it anymore, which is their right. But yeah, awesome community I mentioned. They have great support. They also have enterprise support. So if you're really growing and you need extra help, they'll be happy to help there. And really the big thing is they can do what the competitors can do plus a lot more. And so you can pick one or the other, or try to combine a few, but Next can sort of cover all those bases for you. So talked a lot about static and dynamic. And so we can look at some different ways that they use data fetching methods to make sure that your page is either static or dynamic. And then after this, we'll roll into demos and enough of slides. But they have three big sort of ways that you can fetch data. And so first one is get static props. And so this is for static generation. So this is your Gatsby or Hugo or whatever, where you define your data, you run your build in your terminal or on your server, and then that's it. That's your static site. It's ready to go. Get static paths is sort of a helper with that. It's for like a blog, which is the example we'll look at. It renders all the different pages or paths that you have at build times, because you might not know, it needs to know every blog post you have in there. So it can go through there, determine all those using dynamic routing, and spit out those pages. And then the last one, get server-side props. So this is server rendered React. You fetch data on each request. I know this is one thing that for a while, even at companies I've been at, it was such a pain to try to roll your own server rendering for React. We knew we wanted to use it, but it's not super straightforward. And so to sort of abstract all that away from your own daily work, I think is a huge win. So let's go into a demo. Cool. So yeah, I mentioned that getting started was really easy. So they have a nice little generator. It's called Create Next App. And so I use Yarn. It'll work with NPX or whatever you use. But all you need is Yarn Create Next App. The other really cool thing they have is this whole repository of examples. So they're community driven, and also internally by them, they have created a lot of these, but really anything you would want to do, they have an example for. So if you want to spin up a Prismic CMS example or WordPress I saw, styled components, really anything. There is no like right or wrong example as far as like what they allow, what they don't. I'm sure there's some edge cases, but there's even things like Electron and different areas that you can look at. And so if you want to get started with the project, we could just say, okay, let's do with Redux example. And so that'll go through, it'll run through, it'll only ask me one question, which is what do you want your application name to be? Cool. And then it'll go through, it'll do all that, download all your packages, and then after this, you're one command away from spinning up your app locally. There's no configs, I don't even need to look at the project source. And we're not even going to use the Redux one. So let's look at what we are going to look at building, which I sent this link out, which is just a simple blog. And this is based on an example. I took their just blog starter example and kind of dumbed it down a bit just to make it simpler to sort of work with in a demo format, not for you guys, for me. And so yeah, it has a couple posts. This is all static HTML, CSS generated at build time. And then these are all markdown based blog posts. So yeah, let's take a look. And so the project directory is really there's only one folder that you actually need, which is this pages folder. And that defines our routes. And so we have, so it's file system-based routing. We have our index file, we have some posts, and then the only outlier, or one of the outliers we'll touch on a little bit later, is this _app file, which is just a place to put shared layouts, or if we had like a global header or a Redux store or something, this would be a good place to put it. Global CSS, I'm importing here, but this is completely optional. You don't even need it. I included it for some global CSS. But looking at our homepage, so we saw our posts page. And so all that was required is a file that exports a default React component. So it could be a functional component, it could even be a class component if that's your thing. And down here we export another thing. So I touched on 3 different methods for fetching data. And so this is get static props. And so all this is going to do is going to go through, it's going to look in the directory of posts, which I have all 3 of my posts here, gets the slug, does some different things. And then these posts, like I mentioned, are very like Jekyll-like in the sense they have this front matter, then our post content. So this is just going to go through, it's going to collect all those posts, get us our data, return it as props. We'll ignore this for now. And then it returns those props here. So at build time, it's running this, it's collecting our posts, passing them in as props, and then we're going to loop through those props. And then we just have our little post preview card. And then we have this link component, which we'll gloss over for now. I have another demo that will talk a bit more about that, but it's pointing to this posts slug. And so obviously we don't have a blog post named slug, so this is our dynamic route. Anything encapsulated in these brackets is saying this can be any wildcard URL safe variable. So inside this one, we see our friend get static props again. So these are our post pages we're looking at now. So we have /post, so our file system routing again at work, and then the slug of the post. So dynamic routing happens to be the slug here. Hello world for this one. So this one's going to do a similar idea. It's going to grab our post from our markdown file, parse it, give it some put it into HTML, and then return it as props as a post. So up here, we'll get our post, and we'll pass that in and be able to use that content. And this is all happening at build time and generating this page. And then I mentioned get static paths. So we have this dynamic route, and we need to look through all of our posts in our post directory. And this post directory is just arbitrary. You could name it whatever you want. It's going to loop through all those. I'm doing this for a demo purpose, but normally it would just be, let's go through, get all of our posts, and we're going to return this array of paths. And so at its core, it's going to be an array with some params, and each param is going to have a slug. And so this will make it so at build time, we have our next folder, which is where all of our builds are. If we dig down deep, we see that we have a static HTML page. And we only have one because I did that slice because I only wanted it to get the first post. But so this is what's going to be served. This is what we're looking at when we look at these pages. It's just an HTML file. So the other cool thing, so let's say you do have, I mentioned earlier that if one of the problems with static sites are, well, if you have a ton of pages, build time's going to take forever. And right now I'm telling you, let's build all of our pages at build time. They have a cool option for a fallback page, which if you look up here, we have this, so they have a hook that they use for a router. So we can get anything from the query to a query string, or in this case, we're looking for a fallback. So what the fallback does is, let's say we only wanted to build one of our pages, like I did. So I only built one of our blog pages, but we had 2 other ones up here that we care about. So how do we get that? So a fallback, what that does is, if it's set to true, it allows it to come in and it'll generate that page at runtime. So it'll statically generate that page, it'll shove it in this posts folder, and then it'll be available statically for everyone else after that. So to show you, so I only built, let's see, dynamic routing. So if I head over to our example, and this is localhost, so I spun up our server earlier. This would be the production way of doing it, just it's better for my examples, but normally you just run yarn dev or npm run dev, and then that would be your dev server. It'd pop up on localhost, you'd be all set. For this one, I ran the build. It tells me how big all my pages are, what was static, what was server, and then this is yarn start is for actually production. So like right now, we use this in AWS, so we run the build in CI and then call yarn start when the server starts up, and then we're serving it, at this case, just back on localhost. So we saw that the preview post wasn't built. And so when I go to this, you'll see a flash of red. I hope it translates over Zoom. But that flash of red, what that's going to be is this loading. I have a style here that's set to make the background red when it's loading. And that means that this page hasn't been built yet by our server, and it needs a second to build that. And in the meantime, it'll just show us a loading spinner for only the first hit. So we had our red, now it's built. We pop over to our output. We see we have a new file there, preview HTML. So that's now our static site. So now any other time we go to this page, it's loading it from that static file. So we can reduce build times like that. If we set this fallback to false, that would just make it so it would 404. So let's say we built all of our pages up front and we don't need it to serve a fallback. Well, we can handle that. And then there's some also extra handling up here. If someone were to type in a post that doesn't exist, we would know how to handle that. Cool. And so the other thing I mentioned, or glossed over rather, is this unstable revalidate. So one thing that I know, even when I started using Next and was hearing about the static builds and everything, was that, well, I have to build every time I make a change. So like if I put a new post out, I've got to run a build, which for Next projects, it's not a big deal. It's very fast to build. There's not a lot of overhead. You can kick it off however you want within your own infrastructure, but it's still an extra step. So they have a new and unstable, obviously, because they're working through it, but so far I've been using it. It's been working great on some personal projects. But what this does is it works sort of like, if you're familiar with like stale while revalidate, or even just like max age cache headers, where if a new post or a post changes, so if we were to change content on this, then the first time we reload it, it would service the normal page that we had already seen. But then the next time you reload it, in the background, it's making the update to that content. So we didn't have to rebuild or anything. It just regenerates that content, sort of like busting its own cache. And then that file is then available for you in your post folder, and it's available for everyone else after that. And so we can show a quick example of this. I have this other post that I left out of here, and so it's not in our build folder right now, but we set our unstable revalidate here, so it'll, and this is an interval. We have it set to 1 here, just so it's a smaller interval for testing, and there's not a lot of overhead to this, so there's no problem with setting a low number here. And then I also set it over here in our index file, because we want to be able to either, if they go to the index page, we want them to be able to get the latest posts, or if they go to directly to the post page, we obviously want to make sure that that content's up to date. So right now, we'll head back home. We don't see our new post yet. We should have 4. And then we do. So here's our new post. So the first hit served the cache page. Second hit is going to serve us the now statically generated page. So pop open our folder, and we have our new post. And so that's now available for all the users. And so that, I find that to be one of the coolest pieces, even for if you do just have a personal blog or anything, just to be able to not have to worry about rebuilds and have it rebuild anytime you change content, delete content, is really powerful. Cool. So let's pop over. We have,
James, I have a quick question, if you don't mind. So the start command, so that's not like, that's running like a node server, right? It's not just like a static server.
Correct. Yeah, it's like, it's all webpack under the hood. So it's like a webpack dev server. It's an all node. Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool. That's so when you push it to production, it's not like on a static hosting or something. It's on, actually it's running on a node server.
Yeah. So you can run it on your own infra. That's just like a node based server for sure. Cool. Awesome. So yeah, then I have another little example, and this is more of like a dynamic example that I think about when I think about like building a new web app for a new startup or something, but it's obviously super simple and super contrived and not as nice of styling as Dylan's last week. Thought about putting a lot of time into it and it fell apart. So yeah, right now, and both this and that other blog, wherever I put that over there, these are both hosted on Next is under the company Versal, and they have a hosting platform which is awesome and super easy to set up. I deployed this Next site in probably 2 minutes, or actually way less. I had to choose a branch and then it did everything for me, and it was free. And I'm pretty sure I've never put a credit card in, so. That's a nice perk for especially like personal projects and stuff and open source stuff. Yeah, so we have another Next app, similar idea to this one. We just have a pages directory. And we have our index, which shows some users that we get from an API. And for this one, we also have this head component, which I know React Helmet is a super popular way to sort of dynamically put things in the head of a document within a component. And so this is very similar. So we can have a special title for each page or whatever you want to put up in there, any meta tags or what have you. But for this one, we're using Git server-side props. And so this is going to be every single render or every single page hit is going to be calling this exported function. And so Next knows to look for this. It passes in this context object, which we're not using, but it would have things like your query strings and parameters and things like that. So if we look, we are using fetch inside of this. So this is only going to be called on the server. Sorry. So it calls this API, this super secret API. Next also has built-in environment variables. So we have our super secret API URL, which is the third party. And then we have this other one, this prefix with Next public. And if you use create React app, then you're familiar with the sort of this exposing these more public environment variables. And so this is the way that they do it. So super secret API URL will never see a user's browser. They're never going to see it. This one they will. So we saw up in the head, I use our site name. And then here we use our super secret API. We're calling fetch, which they polyfill on the server, as well as for browsers that don't support it, so you don't have to worry about it. And we fetch those users, we return them as props, and then we have our users that we can loop through. And then I kind of glossed over the link component, which is how they do client-side routing. So it's at the end of the day, it can be all client-side routed to, not every page is a hard refresh or anything like that. So this link component helps us get there. And so in this example, we are linking to another dynamic path. So we have a user ID, which the more I look at this file structure that I created, it might be more confusing than that. It seems very strange, but I guess that's what I get for doing a super contrived example. But so we have a user ID and a profile. So this maps to our actual folder within our pages directory. And then we have this as prop, which is going to be the actual user's ID. So we're going to fill in that user ID param, and then obviously the profile after that. And then we just have a link, and they pass the href down to this link, and so that's all taken care of. So when I click on that, so it loads and then it fetches it. I didn't want to take the chance of calling the API again, so we're always going to return the same username, but the ID is dynamic, and that's going through. So this links over to our profile, and we just saw that load. And so this is another separate page, just exports this default function. We don't have anything else. We don't have any data fetching in here. For this example, I just fetched the data client side, and I can get the user ID. I mentioned that use router before. We can get the user ID from the query. the query object, and then we can then use that user ID to go fetch the data for that user. So this is really just showing that like I have chosen a number of different ways to fetch data, whatever's best for the job. I could have done all this server side, but then you sort of are working up against time to first byte, and why not just show a shell of a page, and a lot of other considerations. But for this one, I'm hitting an API, and Next has built-in API routes. So this is another, I think the only other special folder is pages/API. So anything within there is going to be an API route. So we have pages, API user, and then we have another dynamic route of ID. And so this is just like an Express API. It uses the node request and response objects. So they should be familiar if you've worked in that realm. But for this one, it's super useful just to really give you that full stack app. So if you need to make database calls, or in this case, this is just like a fake database call I'm making. So we pass in the ID, we get that, and then we can return whatever we need to the client. And so that's obviously accessible however I want to hit it. So if I wanted to go directly to it, I don't remember it now, user, I think. So I can go get that, just return some JSON with my Billy Blanks guy. And so yeah, that's a nice way to sort of abstract away some of that logic and keep it all within itself, make it a true monorepo. And that, yeah, that uses the same idea with dynamic routing, and super easy to get up and running, and you don't really ever have to leave the repo. So then I also mentioned this app. So for this example, I use style components. That's what we use at RV Share, and that's what I like to use. Next also works out of the box with Sass or CSS modules, or just regular CSS. And it works really great. And I'm becoming more of a fan of CSS modules, but I think that's just because I see how many, yeah, John likes that. But yeah, for now, style components. So for this example, the special app, which is just the only thing, it takes in 2 props that are just hydrated by Next. And there's the component, which is basically anything within our shell of the app. And so that's what makes this client-side routing work. So we're not doing a full page refresh here. It's literally just whatever's in that sort of shell. And so in this case, I threw my nav in this app. So you see that when I highlight it, the highlight is staying because it's not reloading the page. So there's like sort of your React router abstraction. Don't worry about it. Like, it'll do its own thing. I've never thought about the router more than just like setting up my pages. I don't have to tinker with anything or stay up sleepless nights with that. But yeah, then the other thing I have is my theme provider, just so my entire app can have my style components theme, which is very complex. And then I have this global style, and this is just like how I like to format it with like this. It doesn't need to be like that. And then to get style components working or anything, I pulled this straight from the example too. And anytime I start up a Next project, I just look at the examples, try to find what technology I'm using, and then I do. So this should look familiar if you've ever done server rendered style components. But Next also has this document, which is another sort of the only other specialized file within the pages directory. And it allows you to do things like this, where this get initial props is sort of has been phased out as far as data fetching, but for this it's still useful. And it acted a lot like get server side props. But for this example, we just collect all of our styles from our style components and then output them. And then Next kind of does the rest. Like I never have looked at this function after I set it up the first time. But then other than that, this is a classic sort of React class component where it has some special tags that we imported up at the top. So we extend from document, and then we do all these other imports, which if you use this custom document, you need to make sure you have these in there, but that's pretty upfront in like the docs and any examples. But in this case, I just dropped in a Google font as well. I think in our document that we use, we put like our Google Analytics and our 800 million other analytic providers, and that all sits in there and just does its thing and sort of set it and forget it. This isn't really a file to like be putting your navigation in, like that's what app is for. This just is like essentially static. You don't need to mess with this much. Oh, another thing I want to touch on. So I mentioned that Git server-side props only runs on the server. So if I were to import like some, I don't even know what some super expensive sort of node packages, but if I were to import it up here, like, I don't know, crypto is a big one or something, but if I import some node module up there and then I use it down here, of course it'd be worried like, well, I don't want to include this giant node module in my app, and it doesn't. It gets rid of all that code. Anything within Git server-side props that's imported, that's not used within the component itself, is not included in client-side bundles. None of this logic is in the client-side bundle. You won't ever see it. And Joe actually created a tool to show you sort of what gets eliminated between a client and server bundle. So it's a cool side-by-side tool where you just put in your whatever code that you have in your component, and then it tells you what Next is going to put into a client bundle. So it's just a cool thing to see, like, okay, like this, I'm not going to be exposing environment variables or a package that's like 10 megabytes that's just supposed to be a node package. So you can do your database calls in here or whatever. And then the last thing I'll touch on with the Git server-side props, which I think is really cool, is that, so like on the first hit, this is all like, this is all rendered on the server. And then this is all the data that gets rendered. But then as you navigate to other pages, and I don't know if my example will show this necessarily, or it might actually. So right now, if we go back to the other page, we need a way to get that data, but I just said it was only on the server. Well, it's not exactly. It calls an internal API. So this Git server-side props generates this API endpoint that you don't even need to know about. It just does its thing where whenever you navigate back to that page, we don't want to do a full render. So you saw that we didn't, our network is only two things. So it's our webpack and then this endpoint, which just returns our props. And so these were the same props that came down when I did a full page refresh, but they're just made available to us via this endpoint the Next handles, and you don't have to call it, you don't have to think about it, which is super cool. Cool. Oh yeah, and I'll touch on just a quick like couple other things just for like extensibility. So I mentioned that how much I love Webpack, and so whenever I'm having a rough day, I say I'm going to go write some Webpack code. And so if you want to, you can. They have this Next config.js. It's useful for super extreme edge case stuff. There's a ton of plugins that the community has built it, and they have as well. Things like this bundle analyzer that is pretty cool with, I'm sure you've seen it before. I forget what the exact name is, but it basically shows you different Webpack modules and how everything breaks down. Obviously completely optional, like I could delete this file and life would go on. But yeah, any other Webpack customizations, like we have to support IE11, so I have to do some transpiling of some modules and things. But other than that, that's just for a third-party package that I wanted to use. And then other than that, you can extend the Babel file. So here, the only thing that we don't even have to have this file. If we do, we just want to extend the preset from Next Babel, which handles all of the complicated stuff that I don't want to worry about. But then I wanted to have the style components server rendered, so I included the plugin. And then Next takes it from there. There's no like setup or anything goofy with that. Cool. Cool. So what else does Next do? So I mentioned before, they do all of your code splitting for both JavaScript and CSS. You don't have to worry about fiddling with Webpack and the split chunks plugin and things like that. They care deeply about performance, and that's like I would guess the first consideration they make with anything is does it perform well, and is it going to be good for the users? And so that's super nice. TypeScript support's built in, so there's no setting up anything. The bare minimum you need is a tsconfig file, which if you're using TypeScript, you already have anyway. But other than that, it's all transpiled, and that's all abstracted away from the user. Polyfill is only when needed, so they're not loading core JS on every single page. They're loading a subset of polyfills only on browsers that need it. So IE11 or whatever else is out there that's still supported, which is super nice. You don't have to think about it. You can load data from any source. So Gatsby has a ton of plugins that are great, but they can be limiting depending on where you need to go get data from. So you can load data from wherever. You can use GraphQL. You can use whatever you want. They do automatic prefetching, which is really cool. Another optimization for anytime one of those link components is in the viewport, it does a prefetch in the background. So it's going and getting that resource for the user before they even get there. So another nice optimization, that's something that like would take a couple of days to implement, like if you rolled it yourself, and it's just included. So I mentioned I deployed those 2 projects to Versal, which is their deployment hosted service, and super easy to use. It's super easy just to get any project up there quickly. You can use whatever hosting you want. We use Beanstalk at RVshare for our hosting, but I've used it. I've deployed Next to Google Cloud Project, wherever. I have it just on like a virtual private server for a side project that was really easy to set up. And then they have AMP support. Luckily, I don't have to support AMP, but they do have that built in. I have looked at it before for other projects, and I know for sure that I don't want to have to set it up myself. So they have that baked in, optional. It's an opt-in sort of thing. They have that huge repository of examples, which is really cool, and a really great team who back everything up and are constantly pushing things forward. So why might Next not work for you? As you can see, my list is very small. I don't have a lot for you. It's super fast changing. So if you're going to have a blog that sits idle for 10 years, like I probably wouldn't use it, just because you're going to be way out of date with like everything. Just write some HTML and call it a day. No plug and play plugins for data. So if you really liked Gatsby's ability to just drop in whatever, GraphQL or different things, then that's great. But you lose out on a lot of other things at the same time. Or if you don't like React, which is cool too, you probably wouldn't use it. It's not going to be for you. So Ariana Grande, her famous song, Thank You Next.
Clap, 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 clap,
Thank you.
clap.
Yes, sorry, I was trying to unmute. Thank you, James.
Anyone have any questions?
Yes, I had a question. What was it? Oh, have you done, or do you know much about, or does Next even like have it set up for like authentication kind of stuff, like, you know, like login areas, stuff like that?
Yeah, there's nothing baked in, and it's a question that I see a ton about, like, how do I set up authentication and things like that, and like there's really, I don't know what I think mainly what I've seen promoted is all sort of client side, like sort of authentication. I have some apps that do, it's not the official or maybe recommended way, they're a little bit older, but you can sort of integrate Express with it, and I have some sort of Express session stuff that happens. So there's ways to work it in. There's nothing out of the box.
Nice. Yeah, because I've been thinking about it for a project, but that's kind of a big part of it. So that's cool.
Yeah, for sure.
Is React baked in? Because I didn't see any import React from React like you see in Gatsby or you know,
Yeah.
and you see in React. So you never have that. It's already,
Yeah, you can put it in there, but like it's all
Yeah.
it's in there automatically. You don't have to worry about it. It's injected into any of those files.
Yeah, I think it's advertised as a React framework. So it's first React.
Question, James. This is G here. Have you looked into Next/React and like accessibility? Like, does Next add anything in that respect?
That's a good question. I don't know, not that I know of as far as baked in for different pieces, because I think a lot of it just happens in your own code. But yeah, there's nothing overt, I don't think.
I got one for you, James.
Yeah.
Do you see Next.js as replacing the need for like a traditional framework?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's the direction that I would head with pretty much any application, is that it can do everything. Obviously for more complex things, I would still personally have like an external API, of course, that handles a lot of things. Internal stuff is nice for smaller stuff, in my opinion. It can certainly be used for whatever. But I think it could be a direct drop-in replacement for really any project. Like like I mentioned, we use Rails at our vShare, and I did a drop-in test of just dropping in all of our React server components into a Next project and had it up and running in a few hours. And then just had to sort of rewrite some of the controller logic that we did in Rails. So it was really fast to get up and running, and I think it's certainly battle tested to be able to do that.
That's awesome. Are there any other questions or comments before we wrap up for the night? We have a couple of people sharing a couple links in the Slack room. So I encourage everybody to check that out. But yeah, if nobody else has any questions for James or for us, I think we'll wrap up for the night. Johnny, you good?
Yeah, no, thank you very much, James, for stepping up and giving talk and stuff. And as Dan mentioned at the beginning, we are always open to people who are interested in picking that up and giving a chat. We are definitely here to help you if you don't feel confident in being able to do that yourself, or maybe it's the first time you're trying it out, or you're just scared of something or whatever. We can help you put that content together. We're also up for people who want to do maybe small stuff too. So if you are scared at the thought of doing a full event targeted at you talking the entire time to a bunch of faces on a screen, we can maybe put something together where we pair it up with some other people and do some like smaller kind of bite-sized sessions together for an evening or something like that. We did a workshop before too, if anybody's ever interested in doing something like that. Always open for conversation.
Yeah, I've been mulling some sort of panel on CSS and JS, but I was worried it'd get ugly, so I haven't.
I mean, there's only one answer. So I don't know. I don't think you'd get much more than about 5 minutes of content. So.
Okay. Well, anyway, thank you again to James for doing this. I was super psyched about learning more about Next. I've been meaning to dig into it for a long time, so I was really looking forward to this. And thank you to everybody who spent some time in their evening to hang out with us. And keep your eyes out on on Twitter and on Meetup for our next event. I'll be posting it here pretty soon. And yeah, if you haven't yet, drop your vote on that poll that we posted. It's a little bit above the content from tonight in the Slack room. We can get that event lined up too. But otherwise, everybody have a good night. Stay safe, and we will catch up with you next time. Thanks again, James.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone. Appreciate it.
Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye now.